My dad collapsed on a cold forest floor the night we learned Stephanie Walker had burned every piece of my late mother's memory. I trembled dialing the airlift. She laughed through texts, mocking our grief. My hands trembled holding Dad's and Iku, haunted by ashes and laughing emojis. That night felt like betrayal wrapped in gasoline. We had trusted her, she torched our past and smiled. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. We sat around the Thanksgiving table, laughter laced with memories of my mom. Aunt Linda's compliment just as beautiful as Mary made Stephanie's smile falter. Dad beamed, clueless. Her grip on my hand tightened as Uncle Joe prayed for Mary's soul. A simple blessing turned ominous. A silent war declared across a table of turkey and remembrance. Stephanie's wine glass drained faster with each tale of Mom's kindness. That night, jealousy took root beneath her polished exterior. One night, I found Stephanie in Mom's closet, holding her scarf to her face. She claimed it smelled like mildew and tossed it into a trash bag. My chest tightened. That scarf had my mom's perfume, lavender and pine. I told Dad, but he brushed it off. She's just cleaning meant erasing. I started hiding keepsakes in my room. Stephanie's smiles felt rehearsed, her hugs colder. Her war wasn't loud. It was deliberate, disguised as tittying. When I caught Stephanie tossing Mom's photo albums into a donation box, I yanked them back. They're memories, not clutter, she shrugged. Dust doesn't equal love. I showed Dad, he sighed. Too tired to argue. Stephanie's smirks at everything. That night, I locked the albums under my bed. The house felt colder. I started noticing things missing: Mom's jewelry box, her books. Stephanie was curating history and deleting love. Stephanie scheduled a cleansing ritual, smudging the house of old energies. Dad sat quietly, gnawing. I stood frozen as she burned sage in front of Mom's wedding portrait. The smoke curled around her smirk. Time to move forward, she said. My stomach churned. That night, I found the portrait face down in the garage. Stephanie blamed the wind, but the garage door was locked. From inside, I overheard Stephanie on the phone. She'll never be enough like Mary, thank God. Her voice dripped with contempt. I stormed in. She snapped her laptop shut. Private call, she said, calm as ice. Dad looked up from his paper but said nothing. I wanted to scream. I started recording her low-volume hidden mic. If silence was complicity, then proof had to be my weapon. Stephanie replaced Mom's name on the mailbox with final letters, the Walkers. I peeled it off. She slapped my hand. We're a family now. I stepped back, seething. Then stop erasing the one who made this house a home. Dad arrived mid-standoff, confused as Stephanie cried. She hates me, he consoled her. My voice cracked. She hates Mom, but no one listened yet. We confronted her in the living room. He dead, and the last photo of Mom I had left. Stephanie smirked. You're obsessed with a ghost. I snapped. You're obsessed with replacing her. Dad's voice shook. Is this true? She scoffed. Called it grief paranoia. I pulled out the recorder, played her mocking laughter and cruel words. Her eyes widened. You violated my privacy. I didn't flinch. You torture our memories. The silence was finally ours to command. Stephanie lunged at the recorder, but Dad stepped between us. Enough, he said, voice cracking but firm. She froze. I was trying to help you move on. His hand trembled as he pointed to the door. Not by burning her out of our lives. Stephanie's expression cracked. You'll regret this. I stepped beside Dad. No, we've regretted silence. That ends now. The photo remained upright on the mantel. Finally, it wasn't just surviving, it was honoring. The next day, Stephanie packed boxes with forced calm, throwing glances like daggers. I helped Dad down the stairs, slow, deliberate. Each step felt like shedding chains. She paused by the door. You've made a mistake. Dad didn't look at her. No, I finally see clearly. The silence after the door shut felt sacred. We weren't the same. We were lighter. Not healed, but free from pretending the house hadn't been burning beneath our feet. A week later, Dad collapsed while gardening. The hospital called it stress and dehydration, but I knew Stephanie had left scorched earth. As I waited outside the eco, I reread Mom's last birthday card to Dad. Saved in my wallet. Love isn't erased by time. I whispered it aloud. That night, I vowed to keep her alive, not in ashes or pain, but in presence. Stephanie had taken memories. I would rebuild them, one story at a time. Stephanie wasn't done. I found her at the church fundraiser, arms around Aunt June, spinning a tale of emotional abuse. They isolated me, she sobbed. Aunt June's eyes shot daggers when she saw me. Stephanie had planted seeds of sympathy. I walked away, hands shaking, heart pounding. Truth wasn't enough. Perception was the new battlefield. If she wanted to weaponize pay, I'd need more than proof. I'd need allies who remembered Mom too. Online, Stephanie posted family photos, cropped, filtered, false. My mom was never in them. The captions oozed revision, our little home, healed by love. Comments flooded in, you're so strong. So glad you moved on. I created a burner account, posted the unedited truth videos of her cruel words, the laughing emojis over Mom's urn. It spread fast. Some unfold out her, some asked questions. The narrative cracked, but she didn't break yet. Drama had gone digital. Stephanie filed a restraining order, claiming I harassed her online. The police showed up. I handed over the raw audio, the untouched files. They left, unconvinced but neutral. My hands shook with rage. She flipped the victim switch like a professional. Aunt June stopped returning my calls. Dad stay quiet, worn down. I started visiting community groups, sharing Mom's story. Not for pity, for power. Stories remembered were stories protected. And I needed witnesses. One woman from group Marta recognized Stephanie from her old support circle. She manipulated everyone. She warned. I asked if she'd testify. Marta nodded. She made me think I was the problem too. The puzzle twisted tighter. Stephanie had practiced this, not just with us. I collected statements, screenshots, recorded stories. The narrative was shifting finally. We weren't just rebuilding memories, we were building evidence. This wasn't a family feud anymore, it was a reckoning. The court hearing came. Stephanie arrived with her lawyer and a folder of lies. I came with truth recordings, witnesses, Marta's affidavit. Dad, thin but steady, testified too. She tried to erase Mary. The judge listened in silence. Stephanie cried on cue. But this time, the courtroom didn't lean in, it leaned back, measured. My voice didn't shake. This was never about Kate, it was about survival. For the first time, I felt the ground shift. Stephanie was ordered to stay away, her restraining order denied. The judge's words echoed, your narrative contradicts overwhelming evidence. She blinked, stunned. Dad squeezed my hand outside. Reporters waited. When asked, "Why speak out?" I answered, "Because silence was her weapon, not anymore." That night, I lit a candle beside Mom's photo. No more whispers, just light. Her story hadn't been erased. It had been fought for and finally reclaimed. Stephanie's silence. Deafening. As Stephanie's sister emailed me, "You're not the first, you won't be the last." Attached was a letter handwritten, filled with guilt. "She did this to our mother too." My breath caught. The pattern spanned generations. I shared it with Dad. His hands trembled. "We didn't stand a chance," he whispered, "but we stood." That night, I added the letter to Mom's memory box. The past hadn't just returned, it had spoken. Out clear, unighonorable. At a family barbecue, Aunt June pulled me aside. I was wrong. She handed me a framed photo, Mom holding me as a baby. Stephanie faded in the background. She never smiled in this one. It had always been there. We just hadn't looked close enough. That night, I created an album, truth told in snapshots. Each photo a refusal to forget. The story wasn't just oral anymore, it had color, shape, and undeniable presence. Stephanie tried to sue for defamation. Her lawyer dropped the case mid-deposition. After hearing the full recordings, I watched her storm out. Jury unraveling every polished layer. Her power was built on perception once fractured. She had nothing. Dad and I didn't celebrate. We just sat in the kitchen, tea in hand, quiet. Peace wasn't loud, it was still real. A victory wrapped not in noise but in the relief of nothing more to fear. I started a blog. Her name was Mary, sharing Mom's stories. Old photos, letters, and laughter. Comments poured in from strangers who'd lost someone to quiet cruelty. One message read, "Thank you, my daughter finally believes me." I cried. Not for pity but for legacy. Stephanie had erased pages, I rewrote volumes. Her silence birthed a chorus. Her cruelty seeded a community. Mary Griffin wasn't gone, she had gone viral. And this time she wasn't alone. A podcast host reached out, wanted to feature our story. "This happens more than people admit," she said. Dad hesitated, but agreed. His voice cracked, sharing how Stephanie manipulated his grief. The episode went viral. Support poured in. "I see my family in this. Thank you for speaking." Stephanie tried to discredit it, but her credibility had crumbled. Truth had rhythm, now spoken, recorded, and shared. Grief once isolated us. Now it had linked us to thousands. Stephanie sent a final message, "You win, hope you're happy." No apology, no ownership, just bitterness dressed as surrender. I didn't respond. I saved it, though, proof that some people fold, not change. Dad saw it too. "She'll haunt herself more than we ever could," he said quietly, and maybe that was enough. Not revenge, not validation, just distance, just the quiet knowledge that we'd survived her, scars and all. Her silence a gift this time. Dad surprised me on Mom's birthday. He planted lavender and pine in the backyard. "Her favorites," he whispered. We stood side by side, soil on our hands, silence between us not empty but full. He smiled, faint and real. "She'd be proud of you." For the first time, the garden felt alive again, not just green but sacred. Stephanie had salted earth, but we had replanted, and that more than any courtroom win was triumph. We hosted a memorial gathering for Mom, just close friends and family. No speeches, just stories. Laughter echoed under fairy lights. Aunt June read a poem. Marta brought cookies shaped like lavender blooms. Dad played one of Mom's old records. "She hated silence," he said, smiling. Stephanie's absence wasn't discussed. It didn't need to be. This wasn't about her. It was about reclaiming space she once poisoned. That night, grief felt lighter, like Mom had come home. I found one last voicemail from Mom, dated days before her accident. "Love hard, even when it's messy." I saved it, then played it for Dad. He closed his eyes. "She always knew," he whispered. We didn't talk for hours, just sat with her voice playing softly, looping like a heartbeat. Stephanie tried to erase her, but this was eternal. We didn't just remember her. We lived by her echo. That voice would never be silenced again. That winter, I published a book, part memoir, part tribute, Ashes and Lavender. It sold modestly, but that wasn't the point. At the launch, Dad introduced me. My daughter didn't just survive grief, she rewrote it. People cried, so did I. Stephanie hadn't destroyed us. She's revealed what needed rebuilding. The book's final page read, "This story was never about her, it was always about us." And with that, Mom's memory became more than survival, it became legacy. After the book release, I walked past our old house, the one Stephanie once claimed. The mailbox now read Griffin. I didn't knock, I just stood, letting the wind carry lavender's scent from the garden. Dad's handwriting painted on the fence, "Love lives here." I touched the wood. For the first time, I wasn't filled with rage, just recognition. We had lost so much, but we'd won the one thing she never could, truth that endured. I found the scarf Stephanie nearly trashed, lavender and pine still faint. I wrapped it around my neck, heart steady. In the mirror, I didn't see her shadow, I saw resilience. "We're okay now, Mom," I whispered. Dad stepped in, holding tea. "She'd love seeing you like this." We didn't mention Stephanie, we didn't have to. Her chapter had closed. Ours, still writing, still warm, still full of the kind of love that survives every fire. Dad started volunteering at the community garden. I joined him every Saturday. We didn't talk much, just worked the soil, let the sun heal what years had weathered. Once, he said, "You think grief ever ends?" I shook my head. "But it gets less lonely." He nodded. We weren't fixing each other, we were growing beside what couldn't be changed. That was our peace. Stephanie was a storm, but storms pass, and we rooted ourselves deeper. Stephanie moved away. No one asked where, no one cared. Dad and I changed our last names back to Griffin quietly, without ceremony. It felt like reclaiming a room we forgot we owned. Her memory faded, not with bitterness but disinterest. She became a lesson, not a wound. The community remembered us not as victims, but survivors. And the garden, it kept blooming. Lavender strong even through frost. We held a small bench dedication in Mom's name at the park, carved with her favorite quote, "Kindness leaves a scent no storm can erase." Neighbors gathered, hands over hearts. Marta cried softly. Dad touched the plaque, eyes misty. "She's everywhere now," I said. In memory, in action. We didn't just survive loss, we translated it into legacy. That bench wasn't just wood, it was truth made permanent. At night, I sometimes hear wind through the trees and imagine it's her whispering, not gone but woven into every healed moment. Dad sleeps soundly now, lavender tea at his bedside. The photo album remains open on the coffee table. Pages often turned. We don't flinch anymore. We remember, we live, we love fiercely, and we never ever let silence speak louder than truth again. Thanks for watching. Subscribe because I believe every story hides a truth, and sometimes, just listening can change everything.